You know, I really should be talking about the dumpster fire that is Battlefield 2042. But no, we're going to jump into a part 2 of a discussion about yet another dumpster fire that's been slowly smoldering for the last decade. Resident Evil 6. Let's discuss this. Welcome back to the channel, guys. This is AJ. Now, we are here for part 2 of our Resident Evil 6 discussion. Last time, we wrapped up the plots of the 3 main campaigns. 4, really. I mean, again, last time I didn't really dive too deeply into Ada's, again, because hers is mostly separate. But anyway, I highly suggest you checking that out. If you didn't do so, there will be a title card right up here. So, yeah, so pretty much we finished the campaigns, and without further ado, let's dive into the rest of the discussion. Now, let's briefly delve into the game's mechanics. The game mostly maintains its third-person over-the-shoulder perspective pioneered in Resident Evil 4, but with a wider degree of camera control, although at seemingly random times, we'll get those weird angles that were common in the earlier entries in the series. The real-time weapons and inventory selections that don't pause the game carry over from Resident Evil 5. Herbs can now be stored as tablets for quick access that don't require going into the inventory, until you need to combine for more herbs. The sub-weapon selection is also quick access. While some people may not be fans of this, as thoughtful inventory management was a core part of the earlier game's difficulty, I believe it was designed this way to match the game's fast-paced combat. Speaking of combat, in addition to the now standard finishing melee moves for stunned or off-guard enemies, we now have access to freehand and melee moves. These do drain your stamina. However, you can mitigate this by utilizing the new skill system implemented this generation. In addition to ammo, defeated enemies drop skill points that can be exchanged for various skills that can aid in combat. You can now have access to a quick shot, which also drains stamina, but can help when being swarmed. On top of this, certain weapons have special modes. Leon, for example, can dual-wield pistols. While this uses double the ammo, it is very useful in mowing down hordes of enemies. And I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up the ever so popular quick-time events. More on this later. Now I think I can finally get into what you all came here for. Let's talk about the things that I didn't like. We're going to talk about the plot points and character arcs that really I had the most issues with. These are in no particular order. Now, while I like the idea of a person that high up in the government pulling the strings, Simmons' motivation seems childish at best and downright idiotic and counterintuitive at worst. I mean, this guy sacrificed an entire city, along with the president, to cover up a previous cover-up that would then require an additional cover-up. Yeah, I don't think he thought that one through. And I'm not even going to comment on the whole cloning Ada Wong thing, which is contrived at best. And on that note, I'm not a virologist or a geneticist by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm pretty sure cloning doesn't work like that. I mean, if anyone in the comment sections has any knowledge that can prove otherwise, please let me know, but I'm pretty sure I'm not wrong. Now, my next plot character issue lies with Helena. Now, I don't have a problem with how Simmons was able to blackmail her, but I do take issue with how she got Leon on board with her plan. I'm pretty sure if a member of the Secret Service, you know, the people that are directly responsible for the president's safety, had a hand in a terror attack that resulted in the president's demise, the last thing a fellow U.S. agent would do was allow them to lead them on a chase with a vague promise of an explanation. Granted, although Simmons did threaten Helena's sister and was ultimately responsible for her death, the fact that she wasn't charged with treason due to lack of evidence just doesn't sit right with me. Now let's talk about Chris and Peters. One of my narrative pet peeves is using amnesia as a plot point. To me, it's one of the laziest and one of the most overused plot devices. And what aggravates me further is the fact that that subplot went absolutely nowhere. I mean, making Chris forget his encounter with the fake Ados, so that he sits quietly and long enough to rejoin the other cast members in 6 months' time, just for him to conveniently regain his memories, seems pointless. Now, I get what the writers were going for, making his memory loss a physical response to the trauma of having to gun down his fellow soldiers, but I feel like they could have done without it. Now, let's talk about Jake, or rather, Jake's old man, Albert Wesker. Wesker is one of the OG Resident Evil villains, responsible for damn near the whole plot of the franchise in one way or the other. I was kind of sad to see him meet his demise in Resident Evil 5, and I'm pretty sure the writers were too, since despite there being absolutely no hints, clues, or references alluding to Wesker having a child, here's Jake, his 20-year-old son whose sole purpose is to serve as a plot device for this game, never to be seen or heard from again, which is actually a shame because I actually like Jake's design. My only other issue, which is more of a nitpick, lies with his unfounded reaction to finding out that Chris killed his father. Despite not having an actual relationship with him while developing a disdain for his absenteeism, I just found his reaction kind of odd, but I think that's just Resident Evil 6 being dramatic for drama's sake. Now, moving on to the problematic mechanics of the game. The first few on my list are more like nitpicks, if anything, and then we'll move on to the big ones afterwards. Let's start with quick time events. Now, I don't mind the occasional QTE, but they are littered throughout the game, so much in fact that they actually occasionally break the immersion for me. Next up, while I have seen worse, the cover system can be a little janky at times, but again, not too big of a deal. And finally, I have mentioned this before, but I'll reiterate just how annoying some of these random camera angles are. I can't tell you how many times they threw me off. Now, let's talk about the virus-infected elephant in the room. The main issue that I had, which I think most people would agree with, is the fact that Capcom tried to do too much with this game. Resident Evil 6 has an apparent identity crisis that, it desperately tries to fill 3 different niches in an effort to keep up with the current trends. Much of the puzzle-solving parts of the earlier entries were left behind in an effort to focus more on a combat-oriented style of play. While Leon and Helena's campaign played more traditionally, choosing to focus on regular zombies, Chris and Pierre's campaign felt more like Call of Duty, replacing survival horror-based combat with a fast-paced shooter. Jake's campaign played more like an action RPG. Again, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, it just didn't feel like Resident Evil. Now, interestingly enough, Ada's campaign, while not perfect, had the closest thing to a traditional Resident Evil experience. Not only are there a few more puzzles to solve, but the biggest difference? You played alone. Instead of having an AI partner whose presence already alleviated the little tension present, you're forced to be a bit more resourceful. That being said, a lot of the issues highlighted earlier are actually more apparent at times during this campaign. One big problem that this game suffers from is the pacing. While there's nothing wrong with slowing things down every now and then, having ill-timed or unnecessarily long breaks in the action can throw off the mood of a sequence. And speaking of sequences, I have to address the random vehicle segments. While these elements alone aren't bad, having them in a game that's already taxed with trying to do too many things at once is a quintessential recipe for disaster. On that note, I actually do want to talk about the few things I liked about the game. One, I really appreciate the free range of motion. Not only can you aim, shoot, and walk at the same time, but you can jump forward, backwards, practically lie on the ground, and roll left and right. Just gives you more options of movement and how to tackle enemies. On that note, speaking of attacking enemies, one of my favorite all-time things to do while playing as Jake is using his old fisticuffs. That's right. In addition to the free hand combat that all players they have access to, you have in his weapon wheel access to good old fisticuffs, which again, awesome. Just laying combos on enemies is just really fun, and I hope they retain this for future titles. And the best gameplay aspect to me was the co-op. Now, I might be a little biased since I think co-op based games are just the most fun when you play with people you know or randoms online. Now, another thing that I really do appreciate is the idea of intersecting plot lines. While this game did execute this poorly, I think if they are able to refine this in the future, I would actually welcome it back. But with that being said, it is time for me to wrap this video up. If you guys like the sound of my voice, feel free to like, comment, share, subscribe, and I will see you around. This is AJ, signing out.